evening. Well, this is Lila again with Bedtime stories that I'd sure like to share with you. And Dean Val, my very good friend, is with me, and also my very good friend Tim von Pinnon. I'll be reading from Book 6, Your Dream Visions, by Joanne, the great writer. We will discuss the chapters or whatever time we feel that something very important is that we'd like to discuss. So, I'll be reading now. Crystal meth, or meth, which is short for methamphetamine, has become a very popular drug in both the United States and around the world. This drug was used almost 3 times more than crack cocaine in 1999. In 1983, meth was the first developed from ephedrine. A chemist, Nagasaki Nagai, was responsible for its creation. It wasn't until 1919 that meth was turned into its crystallized form by Arita Ogata. Ogata was probably able to do this by reduction of amphetamine using iodine and red phosphorus. Amphetamine, a related drug, which first came into existence in 1987 in Germany. Meth manufacturing initially began in the U.S. in Hawaii in the 1960s. One of the earliest uses of meth occurred during World War II. The German military dispensed Pervitin, which was meth. It was freely administered to both tank crews and aircraft personnel. Chocolate was often dosed with meth given to tank crewmasters and their pilots. For the last 3 years of Adolf Hitler's life in 1942 and 45, he received daily IV injections of meth by his doctor, Theodor Morell. This was done as a treatment for depression and fatigue. Historians have speculated that this was done to treat Parkinson's disease. However, it is unsure as to whether Hitler had Parkinson's disease or the Parkinson-like syndromes, pill rolling, and finger movements, and an unsteady gait were due to abuse of meth, plus other substances that he was taking. After World War II, meth became known as shabu, and amphetamine, which became largely available in Japan. This came to be because the Japanese military no longer utilized the drug. In 1951, shabu became prohibited by the Japanese Ministry of Health and banned. The banning of the drug is thought to have contributed to the overproduction of meth in Japan. Even today, meth is strongly associated with international crime, and the Japanese underworld is one of the many countries who make and sell to the unaware public. In the 1950s, meth became a more commonly prescribed drug. It was often prescribed for narcolepsy, alcoholism, obesity, and others. By the 1960s, there was a more significant use of illegally manufactured meth by users within their own homes. Crystal meth is made from everyday household chemicals and common household components to make it easy to manufacture. Today, instructions for meth can be ready on websites. Until quite recently, Sudafed, a major component of meth, could be purchased in bulk without question. An ounce of meth is worth up to $1,000 and it's made with $80 of products from your local hardware and pharmacy. In the 1980s, use of meth peaked. In fact, San Diego, California was considered the meth capital of North America by Economist magazine. The United States laws in 1983 prohibited possession of equipment and purchasers of meth producers. Canada passed the Controlled Substance Analog Enforcement Act to decrease the growing rate of designer drugs, both in use and production. Regardless of meth has expanded throughout the U.S. It is in rural places where clandestine labs are often set up. This is because production of meth causes toxic smells that can dispel unnoticed. For each pound of meth created, there is 5 to 6 pounds of waste produced. Despite efforts by law enforcement, men will use it, and it is still alive and raging throughout the United States and the world. This is a serious issue which will take much more work and effort to combat. But with all the money involved, it could last until the end of the earth. For this reason, it's quite feeble and feasible that in a few more years, crystal meth will continually appear in the news, creating an even more devastating history for itself than it has now. Adolf Hitler instructed the use of meth for his soldiers during the World War II to give them a leg up on the enemy. Indeed, it makes sense that Hitler wanted to use substances to enhance his soldiers with their readiness and abilities, as he liked them alert and ready for battle, which of course is a lame and idiotic ideal to create. Just like any athlete may wish to use steroids, there are long-term effects of these drugs, and there are people at young ages having heart attacks and bone deterioration due to meth use. Meth, among other unessentials, will overwhelm the healthcare system as a youth, and it continues to be used in the future. There are those who suggest legalizing meth, but legalizing meth is definitely a nightmare scenario. The U.S. military has a synthesized drug to keep their troops and pilots alert for longer periods of time. From the extreme public, there is evidence that aluminum in the brain is a causative factor in Alzheimer's disease and points towards sodium fluoride's strong affinity to bond with this dangerous aluminum, a byproduct of of aluminum manufacturing. And also, it has the ability to trick the blood-brain barrier by imitating the hydrogen ion, thus allowing the chemical to access the brain tissue. Honest chemists who have attempted to blow the whistle on sodium fluoride's megabucks propaganda campaign have consistently been given a dose of professional blacklisting, and thus their valid points disputing the current vested interests of huge chemical companies has never received the acknowledgement they deserve in the national press. In 1952, a PR campaign rammed the concept of fluoridation through the public health department and various dental organizations. Yet, it has still survived all these years, and various dental organizations. Yet it has still survived all these years. Sodium fluoride has, without most people knowing it, sodium fluoride has continued in the same vein right up to the present day. And so the use of sodium fluoride has now become a standard with today's lifestyle. Do we want to talk about this? I think we should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hi, Tim. Hi, Lila. This is Dean Bell. Nature has its own drugs, and those are natural. There's plenty of herbs and magic mushrooms if you want to get psilocybin and if you want to go on trips. But these are natural occurring substances, whereas what we're talking about here, sodium fluoride and pharmaceuticals and meth, these are all synthetic distortions, and it's no accident that these are marketed and purposely brought out to the public, and they're basically to dumb people down, to keep them passive, to keep them distracted, any number of reasons like that. And it's a purposely done maneuver to help keep the public and the masses under control, just like Hitler did with the sodium fluoride and the meth, just what Lila was talking about. So there are natural substances that do not harm the body out there that we're just not marketed, or just they don't emphasize that there are things out there that are beneficial to the body and mind. But of course, those aren't paid any attention to with the mainstream. So, yeah, maybe Tim, you have something too on that.
Yeah, sure. It sounds like the Earth would be better off if they didn't manufacture any more aluminum. And as far as these drugs and the effects like meth on so many humans in the world, they like the feeling of it, the astral body. I guess it is, once it gets used to that feeling that the body gets, then the brain wants to seemingly continue to have that stuff. And it's a mind-altering effect, too. And from what we've seen of the use of it in war and the effects of it, of people that take it and they take it all their life. They get crystallized veins from it, and they end up, a lot of them, if not dead, in violent things that take place on it, or in the prisons. Just another one of these things in the physical here, as I guess a comparison of how it isn't in the real universes, and about the even the natural things that are mind altering, like the peyote or the psilocybin or marijuana. All these drugs are still opening up a person's aura to these astral entities by its mind-altering effects. So I don't know whether the Callum created them and for certain reasons, and is trying to convince people that some are okay to take and some aren't. I guess that as we become aware of the effects of how it makes each person that uses them, how their focus, what their focus is in life, or their intent, why they take those things. It's we see that there's drugs all over the earth. That's just part of what's going on here in the physical right now, and we see that the drugs are affecting people to make them go into McDonald's or churches, or they start shooting people, and a lot of these people are on drugs that are committing these atrocities on their fellow man. So the effects are very powerful, and that's probably part of the cabal's way to keep in control of man through the distribution of these drugs to humans. And they get people to do what they want for them, dastardly deeds on these drugs. So they're something that we're dealing with here, experiencing on Earth, the effects of drugs.
The very first occurrence of purposely put sodium fluoride into drinking water was in the German ghettos and in the Nazi Germany's infamous prison camps. The Gestapo had little concern about sodium fluoride's supported and supposed effect on children's teeth. Instead, their reason for mass medicating with the SF was to sterilize humans and force the people in their concentration camps to calm bovine submission. October 1954, the research chemist named Charles Perkins regarded a statement in his book, "The Truth About Water Fluoridation," to the effect the idea of water fluoridation was brought to England from Russia by the Russian communist Kremenov. In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler and the German Nazis envisioned a world to be dominated and controlled by a Nazi philosophy of pan-Germanism. The German chemists worked out very ingenious and far-reaching plans of mass control, which was submitted and adopted by the German General Staff. This plan was to control the population in any given area through mass meditation of drinking water supplies. By this method, they could control the population in whose areas and also reduce population by water medication that would produce sterility in women, and so on.